that sorted itself out. Good. StreamYard's telling me I have gone live. That's always a blessing in amongst everything else. Let me just see if I can find myself on here. Pantart is saying I'm live, I think, and that wasn't quite what I wanted. There we are. Excellent. Cool. Let me share this so that, oops, there's my line. Now, ladies, I don't know who will or won't join me this evening because we've moved to my normal, what will become my new normal slot, which is going to be Thursdays, to allow for me to have appropriate care for my husband. Good evening, Sarah. Thank you for joining me, my darling. Your support is always so very much appreciated. So, we are going to be using Quiet Days by Amelia Shizden for the imagery for our make, and of course my beloved Pentacolor products for everything else. It's freezing cold in my conservatory. I have a heater on. If I can hear it, then I apologise. The weather might also throw it down at some point, which also might not help matters. But hey ho, that is what it is. Anyway, let's just move that over there. Anyway, that's what we're going to be using. It's not very Christmassy, and that's sort of intentional because full-on Christmas can start fairly soon. But it is just a little bit too early for me. So I have a wooden box. This could just as easily be being done on a cardboard box that would then need to be primed with acrylic primer. I'm going to use this directly on the bare wood because I can, and because it is wood, and because I've chosen to use one of the Lesueur gels. This is in the old style packaging, Country Rose. I might have used the blue, but that I didn't have any, so that's my bad. But this will work with the imagery because I'm just grabbing a suitable size brush. There we are. Because this will work for me. Good evening, Connie. Thank you for joining me this evening. Hello, Juliana. So let's see what happens. So this is a wood stain. This sort of vintagey, pale pinky colour will work quite nicely on the wood. If you were going to do this on a non-wooden base, then paint it in a vintage rose, and Pentacolor have in their decor soft range a Victorian pink, which might work, but in their ordinary matte acrylics they also have Country Rose as well, and they have a blue and a green. So just choose one that will work with your papers. I'm going to keep the inside fairly simple. Back to basics will continue, because sometimes I think it's just too easy for us to get caught up in using, lots of fancy products, but actually we don't necessarily need to make our lives really difficult. And I'm just going to do the inside of here and the inside of the base, and then we can go for that. I've done a little bit of prep tonight, but not masses. So the live will take however long the live takes, but hopefully it will be good. Good evening, Judith. Welcome, my darling. Thank you, Sarah, for joining and for sharing. It's life is difficult at the moment, but hey ho. But Pentacolor are being really, really supportive and accommodating my needs, so I can make sure that my husband is cared for sensibly and appropriately, given his dementia diagnosis and the fact that he's also got a major problem with his heart, which we're going to have some major major heart surgery involved in the next few weeks. It never rains, but it pours, does it? But that's life. I'm not the only one who has people who are sick in their lives. So my heart goes out to anyone who is. Good evening, Maria. Welcome. I'm going to end up with mucky fingers in a minute, aren't I? As I say, this is a wood stain. It can be layered, so I can add stenciling over it if I want to. But it's just going to provide a nice neutral background, allow the wood to shine. All sorts of... Ugh. I've just got a whole mountain of wood shavings in my eye. That was maybe not the best thing to do, was it? There you go. So there we are. And I do have a pinny, which I probably ought to put on, but you know me. It's never going to happen, is it? So I think it might take a while for people to catch up with the fact that I've moved my lives to a Thursday going forward. I don't know what that means for Vasilis and Blanche, but I'm sure that will become clear in the fullness of time. But I am grateful for the support from the team at Pentart for helping me move to accommodate their needs. So we'll just pop this into here. This doesn't take very long to dry, which is a real positive. And sometimes it's just good to see things. And I can see that I've still got my wood texture in there. Sometimes it's good not to do things that are going to make life really complicated. So this is vintage in the sense that I think that the papers from the latest release papers from Stamperia have a vintage feel. I think they're actually a mixture of several different previous ranges from them, including Hortensia. And then they had a sewing one as well, didn't they? A good many years ago. So they're mixing things up, and that might well mean that you can get out stuff that you've already got. Right, and I've got some bits on the floor, which is always clever. I always forget to put something in. I set up StreamYard quite nicely for myself and then came back to it to start the live to find it had knocked all my cameras out, so I had to reset it up. It's always a helpful activity, isn't it? Anyway, I trust that everyone is well. That's enough of my witterings for the evening. There we are. So we can go care of that. That is permanent once it is dry. And will help protect the inside of the box on whatever I choose to put inside it. Let's just do that edge nicely into there, and then we've got, we'll see, we might have to give this a little bit of a blast. Well, I feel that we are going to. It's not just a straight painting activity, though there is a reasonable amount of painting to do to get to where we are, but then that's what happens when you're using paints and pastes and mediums, isn't it? I can see a bit there I've missed. So let's drop that in. This is water-based products. That makes easy cleanup. All you need to do is tuck it into a pot of water. There we are. So let's give these a re-dry on the inside, which we can do. That won't take very long. So the Quiet Days collection has lots of vintage beiges, browns, purples, pinks and a green. So whenever I'm working out what I'm going to do with the project, then I always have a look at what my focal imagery is going to be, and then pick my colour palette from those, because I think that's just the way my brain works. So, it's helpful to have a base, isn't it, when we're doing things. So let me just get this dry. And then we'll talk through our colour palette based on the imagery in the collection. I will grab the rest of it off the floor in a minute so that we can talk through those colours, so you know where my brain is vaguely going. You know, my brain's a dangerous place. The inside of that doesn't need to be too dry, but that bit does need to be, otherwise I'm going to transfer the leather where I don't necessarily want it. So let's see what I've done in terms of colours for this project. As I say, based on the colour palette in the collection. So there we are. So I have got light purple because I think that fits with that. I have pastel violet because that picks out the pastels in there. I have a brighter magenta, which I might or might not use, a soft pink, and thorn green, which is one of my favourites because I think all of these colours work well in with the imagery that's here. So if I lift that up, so it's not, this is the rub-on book, there we are. If I lift that up, and then we can see that that purple really does work very well, as does this one, and the green. So that's where I have chosen my colour palette from. I've added ivory as a neutral. I've got some antique paste should I want it, and that's where I'm planning on going. So let me just pick up this. So this is light purple, so we can pop that into there, and it's a new pot, aren't I lucky? Here we are. So there we are. Let's just do that. Let's just take that there off there, get that into there. That's not split, so that's always helpful. And let's just paint the outside of here. And yes, ladies, I know in an ideal world you might well want to prime this, but I'm wanting a slightly vintage feel, so I'm not worried if I have a bit of the brown tannins from the wood coming through on here. If it bothers you, then you could use any of the primers from Pentart. It's a wooden box. I'm likely to pick up the acrylic primer, which is a water-based primer, and it's a nice thin and will cover. I could pick up the new primer that comes with the Artisma collection of acrylics. So a white neutral primer that will seal the box. But as I say, I'm not overly worried because I'm wanting a slightly vintage feel to this make this evening. There we are. So and I've clearly undone all of the screws and taken those so that I can paint this properly. I don't necessarily want that blue on the inside of there, but hey ho, that purple on the inside of there, but hey ho, we'll live with what we've got on there. We might just need a little bit of a white down in a minute to get rid of that. But this is, essentially how I work. If I'm going to add layers and dimensional stuff on the outside of a box, then I do like to make sure that the inside is sorted before I do that. Let me just grab a cloth, and then we can soften that off a little bit. It's not going to matter. If that's going to really bother you, then get some white gesso out and gesso the top of it with my pleasure. There we are. And I won't obviously do the back of this because clearly we might the bottom of the box because we'll be here forever, but we do need to do it all in the layers. But hopefully, so this is a box that you could use as storage at home, you could use for gifting. Gift season is fast approaching. I just felt that for this week it's just that bit too near Christmas, too far away from Christmas. The Christmas makes will start definitely next week, maybe more wintry than Christmas, but sometimes you need Christmas present or packaging that serves a useful purpose, and sometimes you'll have people who have birthdays at this time of year or in the season who don't necessarily, where you don't want something overtly Christmas, so something that's a little different, decorated to the palette of the person that you're gifting to is good. And of course this is a recyclable packaging, being a wooden box, so that whoever gets a gift inside it, be it homemade cookies or or even a bauble or whatever you're wanting to give, or some little samples, sized piece toiletries, then they've got a box that they can display or gift on, depending on their preference. So I like the fact that we can, rather than having paper packaging that's covered in foil that then isn't recyclable, then it's quite handy to have, isn't it, to do that. I might need to go back over some of that lasur on the inside because I can see some I've missed, but that's going to wait until post live, otherwise we might be here for a while. And one of the things with painting a wooden box is that you tend to get a slightly rough texture as the grain of the wood swells. It will settle as it dries, but it might not settle completely. So good practice would be to give it a coat of paint and then give it a sand before you do anything else if you want it ultra smooth. And you might need to do a couple of layers of paint if you're doing that to have a glass-like finish. Am I mithered? Do I want a glass-like finish? Not really for a vintage piece, but as I say, you do what works for you. Right, let's pop that somewhere where it's not going to cause me havoc for tonight. So I think we've got a number of people watching, but not many tonight, but that's fine. Life is busy, isn't it? Winter has definitely arrived in the UK with a vengeance. Let's just pop that on that lid. That we will be getting it back out again. And pop that over there. So I think quite often that the later releases of product in a year can sometimes get forgotten about in amongst the fact that we get into Christmas making. So there is a pack of writer papers from Stamperia. Let me pop this down. This one is definitely very vintage. I'm going to pop that over there. We've got this one that is pretty and with the hydrangeas. Not really this time of the year, is it? But dried hydrangeas are. I love that focal butterfly on there. Lots of beautiful imagery. But as I'm going to be essentially covering lots of this up, I'm going for a neutral background. We've got our sewing themes here and some seeds and things here. And one more with that cat. I'm not a cat person. I'm not a dog person either, come to that. But there we are. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to make sure that I've got my box round the right way. I'm not going to prime that. I know, my bad, but that's fine. I have my decoupage blue and violish silky shine. And let's just have a clean, soft brush. I'm going to pop that onto here. There we are. I can pop a good layer of this down. And then because there is a lot of text on this piece, we can then make sure we've got it aligned reasonably. And you will get, because of the size of this box, you will get plenty of, you'd probably get all three that come in the set. So the hexagonal boxes are from Pentacolor. They are she says being careful with what she's using. It's a lot of it's gonna get covered, so let's just pop that down onto there, line it up, and at least then the text that is peeking through is going to be visible. Let's just give that a little brush down, make sure it's attached all the way around, and then I'm just going to add some glue over the top. And I've chosen, unusually for me, the silky shine, but you choose the one that suits you. I quite often will use the matte, but and at Christmas you'll see me using the glitter for its very subtle sparkle that it will add to things. There we are. So there we are. That can go there, that can go on there. I'll lid that pot, pop it out the way, and then I'm going to pop this off to the end. So you can see that I will have space to get more than one project out of this piece. For those of you that are in the UK, the boxes are available from TCHL Interiors, who are based in Rawtenstall, so just north of where I live. And then let me just grab. So we're going to be using one of the molds from the collection. Now, just as a word of, so that you're aware, because these are different to a standard Stamperia mold, and that's a good thing and maybe not such a good thing. Anyway, I'll leave that for individuals to decide. So these are this is the new one of the two new molds that come with Quiet Days collection, and it's quite thin, and the castings are very thin. This one here is from the Christmas collection, so you can see that these are the new mold is much thinner. Now, I don't know if that's what Stamperia are going to be doing long term, but just be aware that they are much thinner. They're more flexible. It does mean that they are potentially more economical when it comes to your product, and it's easier to demold clay from them, which is really helpful if you're wanting to decorate something else, isn't it? So anyway, we have some bits cast from that mold. There are two molds, but I just wanted to make sure people are aware that the molds are different in their depth. The quality of them is, however, essentially the same. So that's also cool. So this is Jekyll Paint Chalky in ivory. I could just as easily have ivory matte acrylic, but that's the one I've got. So let's just give this all a little paint, and then we're going to add some extra colours over the top of here whilst that piece is dry. So these are cast in resin for stability, longevity, which is fine. And then I have primed them with acrylic, with primer paste gesso, because that makes it better, easier for the paint to stick. Certainly if you're using the rapid resin from Pentart, which is a lovely medium, then these will cast quickly and demold, and will be, because they're thinner, will stay more easy to shape. So if you're wanting to pop these onto a curved surface, the thinner mold is helpful from that point of view. So but just thought you should be aware, if you're ordering them, that they are definitely thinner, and that is clearly a choice that Stamperia have made. And it does mean that I've got a couple of areas where I haven't flood filled them quite enough, and some of the areas therefore are very thin. There we are. We don't need to do all of them in the ivory, but we're going to paint the frame and the clock, which the frame comes from the second of the molds, which also has buttons, some swirls, a letter. What else does it have on it? A vintage camera that's much smaller than the ones in the plastic molds that Stamperia released a few years ago. So I think I'm a fan of this thinner casting. You'll certainly use lots less product, which is something, might not be an issue for some, but when you cast as much as I do, it's definitely an issue. There we are. So I'll pop that onto here. And as I say, I'm planning on doing wintry / Christmas after this, but I did want to at least do one thing with this collection before it gets tucked away, probably till the new year. So there we are. We have a base on there. That brush can go in there. I'm just going to I am wearing my hoodies, Sarah. Absolutely, I'm wearing my hoodies. Totally required. There we are. Let's grab. Does it matter which order we do these? Let's get the green out of the way. Why not? Why not? So this is Thorn. It's a soft, almost a dirty green, rather than a clean green. If that makes any sense to anyone. Don't always necessarily have to make sense, do we? There we are. And we're not going for complicated. And it wouldn't be a make for me if we didn't have mould, would it? A little bit of decoupage, a little bit of mould. Of course it has to happen. There we are. You can see how thin some of these castings are, but they still have managed to keep quite a lot of detail in them. But these are definitely thinner, and therefore they'll be less heavy for your make. So if you're casting with resin but wanting to put on cards, then definitely it's another positive, isn't it, for doing them. I do have a thick winter jumper on, Sarah. Has to be said, I do have. So we're choosing these soft, more muted colours because of the project itself and because of the papers. It's always helpful to for me at least, to have a prompt point for my pieces. Let me just give this clock a little bit of a blast because there's some leaves on here that I just need to pick out to paint with that green before I pop that away. There we are. And then we'll pick out some of the other colours. But we haven't got masses of painting to do, of painting. So I think that's a leaf down there. So let's just pop some of that into there. There we are, that's a leaf. Now then, that might prove slightly more traumatic. I'm not too sure what that thing at the end is. I'm going to make it up. I think it might be a swirl, but we're going to make it in the green. There's definitely two leaves over here. Don't want that on the top of there. Let me just wipe that back. I'll pop that into there. There we are. That's going to get into those nooks and the crannies, and then I can wipe it off the surfaces that I don't want it on and paint over what I don't want. There we are. So let's just soften that a little bit. That's just, ooh, she says, having put green paint where she doesn't need it. But there we are. We'll give that a blast and we'll get rid of some of the extra. There we are. Off that. Those leaves can stay. Let's just wipe off, as this is partly dried, some of this colour off here. To add an extra texture, mean that they're not quite so flat, and mean I don't have to get lots of brown distressing out. There we are. Let's just do that. So this is quite a nice technique when you don't want to be adding necessarily brown into a project. If you want to add brown, then be my guest. You've got more control when it's partially dried than when it's all wet. If you want to wipe more back, then definitely do this when your paint is wet. There we are. Or fully wet rather than partially dried. There we are. There we are. So that's that. That's, ugh, she says. There we are. And we'll de-yuck our fingers. yeah, once I'm back in my other room, then I will absolutely tuck an hoodie on. My hoodies, though, are covered in paint and paste, and they're not looking very nice. It's my own fault for not putting on a a penny, isn't it? She says, not wearing a penny. So there we are. So let's just cover where I made a mess there. Let's get rid of that. Oh, I don't want the green on there. There we are. Always the joy of paint is that you can cover up what you're doing. Won't matter if I've got a coat of cream on there. So let's just pop some of this mallow mauve out. Do I need anywhere near that amount? Of course I do not, but hey ho. Let's put out some of this pastel violet. There we are. We won't need very much of that. And I'm just, these are water-based paints, so I can add a bit of water into them. It's a bit thick at the moment. That's fine. I don't have a problem with adding water into my paints. Some of these have been open for 4 or 5 years, if not longer. So, you know, it's just life. And then we have the light purple we used earlier. I'm not going to contaminate this. Good evening, Isabel. Welcome. So we've got some colours that I think vaguely work with the papers there. More than I need, but okay, that's just life. There we are. There we are. There we are. So let's just pop those over there. We are going to do a bit of antiquing with some of it, but not very much of it, because that's what I want. So we're just going to. She says, I've missed a leaf on here, so we'll go back to that. So let's just mix some of these colours up into here. Not going to be. There we are. So we've got multi-toned flowers. Merge the colours because nature doesn't have stuff as a single colour, does she? She has them all mixed together and they blur naturally into each other. Let's make sure we've got the edges because those will look ugly if we don't. There's the leaf that we need to do. There we are. Let's get rid of most of that paint off there because that was just a tad overly generous on there. There we are. So that looks quite pretty. Quite pretty, I think. I know it's difficult, isn't it, with the shine. There we are. Let's just pop that onto there. So these come out from, as I say, that the mould that comes with the collection. So there we are. So let's just I do have a plan for distressing some of these. You'll be nice there, but we're not deliberately going brown because we don't need to. There we are. There we are. Let's just do those edges. And then we're going to pick up the green in a minute. Pick up the bits that I haven't already caught. So let's just pop a little bit of that into there. That nice, more magenta-y colour. Put that into there. Let's have a clean of that brush. Pick up lots of green while we're at it. There we go. Let's just give that proper better wash. Give that a wipe and a dry. Let's pick up that softer colour and merge it in. So we've got our two-toned butterfly there. There we are. There are several different butterfly shape sizes in the mould, which is always, I think, really helpful because you don't always want ginormous. And they've got different detailing in them, which is also rather lovely. There we are. So that's giving us a two-toned butterfly rather than it being single. And have I got paint where I don't want it again? Of course I have, because why wouldn't I have? Anyway, but there we are. We'll take that one out of there. And we'll find another small brush. There we are. Let's just take some of that. Okay. There we are. Right. Pop that there. Oh dear, oh dear. We are being a mucky puppy this evening. We are indeed. But hey ho, let's just get that into there. Pop that there. Pop that there. Then we're going to have a dry and a clean down, because I can see a couple of areas where I have stuff where I don't want it. There we are. So, but if I try painting over paint that's still wet, all I'm going to do is merge it over everything. So look, it's not necessarily what I want. So that was gubbins on there. Let's reconvert that to that the chalky paint. Get rid of. It's determined, isn't it? There we are. It's determined to be difficult. There we are. Because I don't have the patience of sitting here and painting that one by one by one. Of course, if you do, then you do you. There we are. Let's just give that all a jolly good blast of dry. That's just before I make a mess with that lot. I know that's wasteful, but yeah, let's just give that a jolly good clean. So clearing that stuff every which way possible. So I think this will be pretty when it's finished. We'll add the details in. There's lots of details on that top that we will put back in, and also on these flowers. We need to get these dry. Right, clean those out of the way. Don't knock my screws and fittings out of the way, because that won't help. Right. Can I see bits I haven't covered? Yes. So, because I'm yeah, and that's what happens when you clear your paint away, isn't it? You promptly then need it. See if I can retrieve some of the paint from in there to do that edge, which I've managed to miss. There we are. Good. Hopefully, we've now got all the bits. No need to be sorry, Jack. So I think I might just have confused everyone because because I've moved my lives from a Thursday to a Tuesday, because it's going to be easier for me to manage my lovely husband, because my son is home on a Thursday evening, so he will sort us through that. My husband is diabetic, so we need to make sure he gets his meals at fairly regular times. But because I'm going to add some extra layers to these, I am going to protect them with some varnish I don't want a decent brush to do this with, so I have got the Decor Varnish Matte. I know I use the Silky Shine on the others, but that's fine. This is just a layer of varnish. It's good practice, again, if you are going to be adding distressing inks to things, but also if you're gifting something, you do want your products, your makes, to have longevity, and actually adding a layer of varnish just gives that extra bit of protection. Cleaner brush might have helped, but hey ho, there we are. So there we are. We'll add that onto there. It's not going to matter too muchly if I get some softer colour into it, but there we are. We're going to add in those details for those later on anyway. There we are. Let's just get those leaves done and the flowers covered. Yeah, that's definitely got colour on it now. So let's just wipe that up out of the way with that little bit of a brush. You don't want a thick layer, but you do it's definitely worth protecting your pieces. If it's only going to, it's not going to be something you're going to keep for any length of time, then you'll probably get away with it. But when you're adding and wiping back, actually having the layer of varnish means that that paint layer doesn't get disturbed, which is quite a useful activity. The lovely Vasilis Kontos sometimes talks about being double varnishing, just to make sure you haven't missed anything. So, but you do you. But it's, as I say, if you're going to be adding distressing of any kind or antiquing, of which we all know that that's just something that I love to do, then that is it's just worth the extra time it takes to do that. There we are. Oh, we're doing okay. So let's just pop those over there. Let's just give these a bit of a blast. While I shuffle them, she says, out the way so they don't get too caught up in everything, and then I can move some of this other stuff about and get the box back. She says, there we are, that can go up there. Let's just give this a wipe down so we don't have a completely messy, mucky surface. No problem, Blanche, no problem whatsoever. It's just part of life. I am using Quiet Days collection from Stamperia tonight. I know it takes poor Blanche ages to get. So this is just one of the rice papers. Let's just tuck this into here from the collection. I think, to be honest, this rice paper will work for so many different things. And I've got no crackle tonight. I know, unheard of. So pulling down, not pulling up. By doing this, I'm pushing the edge of the paper onto the box, those edges. I'm not going to crackle, and I don't need to. I'm not going to add any stamping. I think there's enough detail on here, and I'm going to have my composition on here ultimately. There we are. So that's that piece, and loads of paper there for another time. So just so that we're aware of what we're going to do, I didn't want to leave this completely plain. Why would I? So this is a stencil from the collection. Let me just pop that over there and grab a piece of towel. And heaven help me next year when the UK are banning wipes. So there we are. So I want some extra detail on here. And so I'm just going to pick up some of that pale one, the pastel lilac and tap through. And I'm just going to hold it in place. Slightly risky to do that, obviously, because it bounces a bit, but hopefully we'll not have too much of a mess. If you do make a mess, then just let it dry and start again. Oh, she says, with the box tipping. That wasn't quite what was needed. So dry brush, light taps. We're just adding some interest onto here. We don't need to be too specific. You're better off using a little paint, going back over it a few times, rather than trying to do it all with a thick layer of paint. So there we are, and then just tap it through. It's just going to add just an extra layer of interest to the piece, and it's not going to take forever to dry. There we are. And as you can see, I'm making no attempt at matching any of this up because, well, does it matter? Of course it doesn't. It's unusual because that actually says Great Britain on it. There we are. Let me just move that onto there. So, but the key is definitely light tapping, dry brush, hold the stencil in place so it doesn't move about. I think it does have sets of words on here, but let me just give that a little bit of a blast before we turn that onto another corner. And we can go round here. We can pick up what we want. Let's just have some plain text into there. So if you wanted, you could match your pieces up, but sometimes life is not worth it, particularly on an octagonal box, or it's a hexagonal box, isn't it? There we are. So you just take the pieces that you want. Just adding interest to the sides of here. And because this is a lot paler than the piece the colour that underneath, it's showing quite nicely. And as I say, this dabbing technique hopefully means we're not making too big a mess. Hey, there we are. Let's just so we've now got our edges of our box all done with that. So I don't want the top to be completely plain, so I'm just going to drag from the edges a little bit of that in, just to age that a little bit. This dry brush stenciling with a stencil brush is quite a handy activity for just softening edges. Gentle hand is definitely required. It's going to catch the edges of the box. We will do the same on the sides of the main box, in the box bottom in a minute as well, but it will just help link it all in. If you wanted, you could stencil each piece separately, put the box back together, and then, you know, line it all up top to bottom. But, you know, sometimes life is too short. And I will soften that in. Let's just take some of that off. There we are. But I've got almost nothing left on there. There we are. Turn that round the right way. And then I'm just going to do the same. Just catch those edges. You can see how that you really don't need very much when you're doing this. See, that's way too much, but there we are. That's me for picking up fresh. Right, let's just come back the opposite way. And obviously off live I will paint the bottom of this box. Customize the wall ink in with our pieces. That can go in there, that can go over there, that can go there. Inside is plain and simple because it's going to have stuff in it. Let's just take these, grab those. We haven't got 55 tons of stuff. We do need to sort the clocks out and these, and they're still wet. And then we can pop our composition together. We're not, as I say, I'm not doing difficult tonight because, well, that's just because that's how I felt, really. Good evening, Anna. Welcome, my darling. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's much appreciated. And I need to get that varnish dry. And of course, it's a shiny varnish, so I won't necessarily be able to tell. Unlike my normal matte varnish, which I can tell when it's gone matte. The silky shine will be more difficult. Yeah, right. So I'm mixing across the ranges tonight. I have the Wall Lazur Antique in Antique. It is open. There we are. Let's just grab a brush that has been abused. That one will do nicely. And a clean wet wipe. And let's just add some contrast into these. So this little butterfly's got lots of details in it. There we are. Let's just pop that onto here. There we are. That adds a little extra into there. And, and the antiquing will soften or yellow depending on what colour you're using your pieces. There we are. It just helps bring out some of the detail. Doesn't have to be complicated. It's just such an easy thing to do, an easy way of adding into the pieces without making life too complicated for yourselves. There we are. Okay. That one can go into there tonight. So the antiquing gels are water-based products, and as we all know, I have a penchant for using wax-based products, the antique paste, and I'm going to use this because I want to age this frame. I don't want it to be quite so in your face. And of course, these will take a little bit. It gives me longer working time, so I can cover the pieces I want to be browner all together in this, rather than having to stop and wipe it off in between. And the importance when doing this is to make sure that you really have got your paintbrush into every nook and cranny. There we are. And obviously I don't, having put the white on the flowers, I don't really want them brown. So that might give me a bit of a challenge when it comes to wiping off. So let's just get into the nooks and the crannies around all of those letters and the top of there. Now the antique paste is solvent based, so you need to go into a pot of white spirit or the solvent cleaner. So let's just take these. I'm going to leave those leaves the same and then just wipe off. It's just going to age this quite nicely, give it a more vintage style. I'm going to take it off the top, leaving the brown in the low lights. There we are. Quite happily there. There we are. Let's just take this and carefully get into that nook and the cranny. There we are. And let's just take some wax to the surface. There we are. So I'm just going to add some wax onto those handles, onto the hands of the clock, and also onto the rim of the clock. Now then, and I've got a pen here, so I don't know how well it's going to work, because that just now needs to dry before I can add that, and I could ideally get a Posca pen out rather than that. So I'm going to leave that to dry. The hands are all on there. I've got some gold there. So ultimately, I'm going to pop that onto there, comme ça, like that. Okay, so we're going to pop where is, we'll make our composition now. So I know for me this is relatively straightforward, isn't it? I know. Who knew? There we are. Pop that into the centre of there. To get the clock so that it is round the right way. It's always helpful to have it round the right way. And I've got a gap underneath there. So I'm just going to pop some canvas spacers into here, because it's just going to fill that gap up and mean that I don't quite have to put so much onto here. So let's just have that. So the clock, yeah, that's the 12, so that's going to go there. Okie dokie. Why am I doing that? I do not know. So let's just tuck our trio of flowers. Are going to sit there. Our little butterfly is going to sit there. That floral is going to sit partly on and partly off. There we are. We're going to have that partly up, partly off. I'm going to tuck that one into there. There we are. Pop that into there. So I'm just going to stick these in and under and around so that we're building up a composition that I like. But I'm filling in that space just a little bit. Come here. Get rid of that white because it will show. There we are. That can go there, that can go there. Right, wet brush. Wipe off the excess of that. There we are. Let's just tuck that one into there. There we are. So we're just building a composition quite nicely. I'm going to pop that little flower. So you understand why I have so many pieces. There we are. And we're just tucked under, over and around. So there we are. Okay. Let's just pop that into that. So we have a composition on our box, like so. And I'm just going to pop that over there because I'm not completely convinced it needs an awful lot else. But we might. Now these are meant to be ribbons. So let us just got a little bit of a blue ribbon here. I'm going to clearly have to be slightly careful. There are some sheets of bigger ribbons, I think, in the collection, but I like these because they will. I'll pop that underneath there. There we are. That little bit can go underneath there. That's given me a little piece extra here that I'm going to tuck, I think. So I can lift this because it's heavy body gel and pop that underneath there. So the joy of using the heavy body gel is it's just going to allow you to have that extra wriggle room. There we are. There's a bit of floral there. Let's see what else we've got. Because we don't necessarily need all of it. Just make sure I haven't got 3 pieces like there. So, and I don't want all of that, so I'm going to chop him in half now. I know, sacrilege, I know. Take that off there. But actually, I can now lift that, shove that there, pop that there. So it's a good way of actually, I can just take this. I'm filling in the gaps, just building my composition with elements from the collection. It's the joy of a fully collated collection. Can I get the edge of that now? Come on. Let's see whether it's taken. Yeah. There we are. Take that off onto there. Pop that back where it belongs. Into there. Just make sure I haven't wobbled that lot too much in the process, because I have. There we are. Like that. where did I put the other half piece of that I chopped off? Can I see it? It'll be somewhere underneath here. Aha! There we are. I can pop that, lift that, pop it underneath, give this a rub on. I just find it easier to do it this way than to put, make a guess and pop these places in, because I can shuffle my pieces out of the way and move them around and move them back, because I've used the heavy body gel. So I'm taking advantage of that, the flexibility of the heavy body gel to allow me to reposition what I want. There we are. So we've just added those little extra details into the back of there with those rub-ons. Could add some splatters. Do I want some splatters? I don't think I do. And that there's clearly plenty there. And then we've got pieces here. So I'm going to just add. So this says beauty. That can go reasonably centralised onto there. Thank you. You do need a dry surface for these too. Let me just tuck that, because I can see that that's going to irritate me. There we are. To put your rub-ons on. If it's not a dry surface, then they really don't link very well. So one there. Let's have 3, shall we? Let's see what other florals we've got. I think there's plenty in this collection, as you can see, that lots and lots of different options into here. So let's just take that one. I'll pop that into there. We'll go alternate, but we could do them in every single one if that's what you wanted. Pop them on the inside too if that's what you wanted. So if you lift these up carefully at the edges, slowly, if bits haven't lifted, you can then give it a push down. There we are. So one there, one there, one there. So that means we need one there. So let's see what... Do I want one with a word? Let us see. Definitely don't want that. Don't want the cat. Not sure I want the clock. We've got beauty. Do I want the clock? Do I want the clock? Actually, I'm going to take that little icon there with the words in it. But you can add as many or as few. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to take the corner one over here, because it's a crafter's prerogative to change their mind, isn't it? Put that on there at an angle. So off live, I will paint the bottom of the box. I might add some splatters over here when it's all dried and settled. I might not. If I do, I will do white. There we are. Line up the bit that I pulled off in a hurry. There we are. So we have our box made with Quiet Days from Stamperia, their latest collection in vintage tones. There we are. Maximising those thinner moulds and building up our layers and our compositions. So ladies, I hope that has gone well for you tonight, that you've enjoyed the make, and I look forward to seeing you next week. So please take care. Above all else, be kind to yourselves and your fellow humans and anyone else that you might love in your family and those around you. So take care. Bye.